Hi, this is Gregg Deal, the bad Indian behind Dead Pioneers, and you're listening to Vulgar Display of Podcast.
Not a very good Indian, maybe even a bad Indian. My cheekbones aren't high enough. I don't have enough beadwork or turquoise. I do my best to celebrate November like a month-long birthday for Indians. For those of you who don't know, which is probably most of you, it's a National Native American Heritage Month, and unfortunately celebrating feels like I'm celebrating my birthday by myself. No one seems to know that it's even happening, even with all the Facebook notices. I'm a bad Indian. My favorite movie genre is Westerns. My last name.
Hi, and welcome to the Vulgar Display of Podcast. You got the Mox here live from the Barn Studio, and we have a special guest with us online. We have Mr. Gregg Deal from the Dead Pioneers. Greg, how are you, man?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Doing really well. We were talking off air. You keep pretty busy with all those kids and the family and all that, right?
I mean, it's life, you know. What are you going to do?
And you are a man of many titles, artist, activist. This one I like a lot, disruptor, and now I guess a punk rocker. You're gonna add that to your resume as well. We got a new album out that just came out this past September, The Dead Pioneers. We fell in love with it. Came across our radar, not all that long ago, and I can't quit spinning it, man. I'm in love with this record.
I love to hear that. I really appreciate that. It's been overwhelming and humbling, and you never know what you're gonna get when you put stuff out there. So I'm pretty stoked on how it's going.
What inspired this record? What inspired you to start the band? And, tell us a little bit about the record, the recording process, and some of the songs.
Yeah. I keep saying that I accidentally put a band together. I'm a visual artist. That's been, the whole of my career, but I've always been, a little punk rocker since I was a kid. And I grew up in Utah, and it's just sort of a unique place to grow up with a unique music scene in the late 80s and into the early 90s. But I recently, I lost my father several years ago and was just sort of entering into my 40s. And, obviously like the boomer generation can actually have midlife crises where they can buy convertibles and get their rush in other places. And I just don't have the capital to do that, like not in this economy. So my midlife crisis is like an existential crisis. And so I find myself revisiting things from my childhood and old traumas and all of those things. And my wife had the wherewithal to really encourage me to do some things that I hadn't done in a long time, like collecting records. And my father kicked me out when I was like 17 years old. And so I had to abandon everything and just really only take the clothes on my back. And so just sort of had this strange lack of permanence in my life and like never collected anything and was always realizing that like I'd have to move again or I'd have to do this because between 17 and I think 24 when I got married, I think I'd moved like no less than like 26 times. So I was just like nothing was permanent. And I carried that into my 40s and had this moment where my birthday was coming up and my wife asked me, what do you want for your birthday? And I said, nothing. Cause like I'm a grown ass man. I don't need presents, it's all good. And she's like, well, you said something about a turntable. And I just had this spiral where I was like, yeah, but if I buy a turntable, then I gotta buy records. And if I buy records and, like, how am I going to move those records? And what if I don't have enough money to buy records? And I just have like 2 records. And she's like, dude, just chill out and buy the record, and just kind of gave me permission to engage this thing. And I've never stopped listening to that music ever, but to engage it in that way, to buy the vinyl, to take it out of the sleeve, to place it onto the turntable, to hear the needle make that popping noise when it touches the vinyl, and to listen to it and go through this whole analog process when the record stops, to have to go back over to the turntable and flip it and start it all over again. And it was just something that opened up in me and recognizing that there's something really special there. And so even though I've never stopped listening to this, I ended up kind of doing a deep dive, and I ended up tying it into some of my visual work. And that sort of progressed into a performance piece that is just a spoken word piece. It's about an hour long, called The Punk Pan Indian Romantic Comedy. And it is about my relationship with music, how it was growing up, how important music was to my mother and father. My father was an old hippie. My mom was more on the pop end of things. So it's like Crosby, Stills, and Nash on one side and, like David Bowie and Prince on the other side. And, but then also how music was just this incredible thing that sort of saved my life in so many ways, as I think is the case for most people that listen to this kind of music. And in that whole thing and just sort of having this awakening moment and realizing how important this stuff is and listening to it with, new sort of 40-something-year-old ears, I got a grant to expand it and to add original music to it that I would write because I do a lot of spoken word stuff. And so I was looking to cross that over into something that was more musically inclined. I connected with a couple of artists through this program and everything that I was doing. These guys ended up being rad and just like so good. And then we ended up just kind of putting something together as a result of that. This all happened in the middle of the pandemic. So this is 2020. We're trying to make music remotely, which was incredibly difficult, but we had some ideas. The big issue was me, because I'm like stepping my foot into a realm that I'm not familiar with. And I'm familiar with it, in theory, but actually like hitting things on beat and paying attention to, to the beats per minute and everything else. It turns into this whole other thing. And I just kind of got in my head. I got this residency in Florida in 2021, coming out of the lockdown. Things were still a little precarious, but, people started moving around a bit more. And this residency was interesting because it was, 3 different groups. There was visual arts residency and a poetry residency and a music residency. And each of the residencies had a mentor and then had like 6 mentees under them. And so I was the visual artist mentor. And then there was a guy who was one of the mentees under the music, whose name is Lee. And Lee's the lead guitarist for a band out of Atlanta called Algiers. And he was kind of having an interesting time because his mentor was working remotely, which was a bit disappointing for him. And he said, but, I was really excited to meet you because he knew about my work and what I had been doing. And we got to talking and he was like, what are you working on? And I said, I wrote this thing yesterday in about an hour. And then I explained to him what we were doing for this project. I just wanted some along the lines of spoken word with punk riffs, and just kind of having some fun with it and kind of flexing it out and seeing how it goes. And he's like, yeah, that's cool. So he grabbed another one of the musicians who could play drums. He had a guitar. I happen to have a distortion pedal that sounds amazing from Third Man Records that is like the plasma pedal, something along those lines. And we got into the studio because it was a whole campus. So there's like a recording studio there. And we got in there and we kind of worked out what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. We set up microphones and we played it 2 or 3 times maybe. And then we pressed the record button and that's where Bad Indian came from. So there's a single on Spotify for Bad Indian, the first release of ours. That is what you hear on that, the very first recording of us performing Bad Indian.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And so I took that back to the guys I was working with and I was like, yo, check this out. Like, this is crazy. And they were like, yeah, okay, like this is the vision. This is what we're going to do. And we worked it out from there. And it just felt like lightning in a bottle that we were able to put it together so quickly and it made sense like immediately.
The listening audience, if they haven't heard you, obviously there's some punk rock in there. You talk about the records and going back and starting a record collection. I'm sort of doing the same thing myself, right? Because I have like 1 million CDs, but I don't have a whole lot of records. So I'm going back and getting them. What were some of the first ones that you purchased or that you wanted to add to your collection?
The first record that was sort of shifty, because I grew up in like an evangelical home, was Circle Jerks Group Sex. And like, nice. that's a twofer, man. Like, your parents find out that you're listening to a band called Circle Jerks, and then their record's called Group Sex. Like, there's nothing good in that situation to your evangelical parents. So I hid that.
A lot of explaining to do on that one, right?
Totally. So I hid that record from them. So it was about a used first pressing of Group Sex. And it just was funny to me because like my oldest kid, who's now 17 and then was probably 3 years younger, like 14. And they're like totally into it and was loving it and was just like, can I get one of those? And yeah, it was just really funny how it all kind of came together that like I'm buying this record. That's the first record I got. That was like the first record that I tried to hide from my parents. And I just openly bought another one and gave it to my 14-year-old kid at the time.
When you go back and you listen to those old records or those old songs or some of the stuff that you listened to growing up, maybe it gives you a feeling, but what do you think? How do you think those records held up?
Man, they're pretty good. I mean, with the exception of a couple things, like Dead Kennedys have used racial slurs, ironically, in some of their songs. And like, obviously, like, my little Gen Z kids are just like, whoa, like that's a lot. But otherwise, man, I think it's good. Like, it's really good. And in fact, Sage is kind of my litmus for this because they're just like such a punk rock kid and they love the Dead Kennedys and they have opinions about Black Flag that are both good and critical, and we love listening to The Clash. We love listening to old straight edge hardcore, from the late 80s and early 90s. Like they're into it, and that sort of is my litmus that like it holds up. But when I hear it, I mean, I feel a way about it, right? Because I mean, this brings back a lot of memories for me. That Rollin' Band's first record is crazy good.
Yeah.
So good.
I love the spoken word over, the aggressive sounds of the instruments and the music. Tell us about some of the players on this record and who helped you create, the full album.
Yeah. My original guitarist is Josh Rivera. He's in this band called I Am the Owl that gained quite a bit of notoriety here in Colorado. He is a craftsman, man. He is really technical and just is so light and soft. And when I watch him play, I'm like, how are you not like pressing harder? He just has the magic touch. The drummer is Shane, and Shane is just amazing and patient and overly positive about everything. And I'll bring up something whack and he's just like, yeah, man, let's see if we can do it. And you always got to have that one guy in the group that's just like, yeah, why not? Like, let's see how it goes. Lee is a sound guy. If you listen to Algiers, there's a lot of soundscape stuff that happens on that sort of post-punk industrial gospel sounding band. And but the soundscape that's in there is just absolutely breathtaking. And so I feel like he brings an aspect of that to this. It's more subtle, but I am so mindful of the way he hears things and it gets me excited when he gets excited. And then our other guitarist is Abe, who actually came in to fill in for Josh when we were recording. He's a local guy, and everybody knows him. He's a good guitar player. But I don't know how much you would like this. He feels like a sledgehammer, and sledgehammer can still be precise, but it also gets the job done. And he came in and was playing because Josh had a death in the family and couldn't make it to the recording. So he ended up playing both sides, and he pulled it off so well. And also just has become such a good friend and a good litmus for all the things that we're doing. When we play live, Lee oftentimes can't play because he lives in Florida. So we have another guy, Dave, that will fill in from time to time. That's always a good faithful as well on the bass. That's it, man. That's all of us, and we're all just kind of rolling in it together. And I think to some degree, we're all surprised equally, like that this is it's being received as well as it is.
We mentioned you being an artist and an activist. It's not only like a passion of yours, but you've pretty much made your life out of it, right? And there's messages all throughout this record. You mentioned Bad Indian being one of them. Can we talk a little bit about that? Obviously, it explores ignorance and racism. So tell us a little bit about writing Bad Indian and if it did come from a personal experience.
Yeah, no, it does. It is. I mean, first I got to say, I've been put into this activist realm, in my career. I think it's weird. Well, one man calls an activist, another might call an adult with an opinion. Like the difference is like who's got the microphone. And so, but yeah, I mean, these are really definitely things that have happened. In Bad Indian, there's a whole section where a woman, asked me what my Indian name is. And the conversation we had is almost verbatim what's in the song. At the end of the song, there's a statement where I say like that this guy comes into my space and he asks me about my things and he interrupts me. And that also happened. I had a residency at the Denver Art Museum, and I had in the studio space, a man came in and he did that. He interrupted me, and it was just interrupted me because he had a moment where he was like, wow, this guy's really articulate, or, perhaps surprised that like I was smart enough to speak to the things I was speaking to in the way that I was doing it. And he interrupted me. And I think it's interesting because I don't think he woke up that morning being like, I'm part of the master race and this is how I'm going to go about my day.
Yeah.
But there is this sort of thing that happens where like he's surprised at what he's looking at and then blurts it out loud without thinking about what he's saying or the consequences of that by saying, well, you speak real good for a Native American. It's like that's literally where that came from. So yeah, a lot of these things are lived experiences, things that are in my home, things that we think about, things that are part of living my life and just having experiences that they really aren't always in public purview. There's things always happening sort of passive aggressively that people don't see.
Can I tell you about a personal experience that I had a couple years ago?
Yeah.
So me and my family rented an RV, and we're a Midwestern family. We have 3 acres, and we don't stray too far from that, but we try to obviously keep in touch and in tune with other things going on outside of our little neck of the woods, right? So we rented an RV and we drove our kids out, and our first stop was going to be Mount Rushmore. And then we were going to work our way down through the Black Hills and down to Denver and the Rockies and all that. And and it was a special time for us. But one of the things that I was ignorant to is, we were driving up to Mount Rushmore, and there was a lot of picketing up there, right? And then we go and see the Crazy Horse Monument and picketers as well. So that's a conversation that led to a conversation with our kids. Now, they were pretty young at the time, so we didn't get too in depth with it, but it did open up a conversation to have with them. Do you have any opinions on those kinds of things and specifically that area?
Man, these are massive questions because, I totally have an opinion. I mean, within my own work, there is significant historical context to these things. So, it's not just standing up there and saying like the injustice of it all. It's knowing that Native people were part of the civil rights movement in the late 60s and into the 70s, that they, took over Alcatraz Island under, some old treaty that said if land goes unused for a certain amount of time, that it can be reclaimed by Native people. And they did that, and they occupied Alcatraz Island for almost 2 years. There's Wounded Knee Memorial and everything that happened there in the 70s, that's out near Oglala, which of course is near the Black Hills. And just the relationship that these tribes have had on sort of an activist level, all tribes have had on an activist level of some kind, but specifically the Oglala have had this relationship with the federal government. And then over the last several years, between the Dakota Access Pipeline and protests that were happening up at Mount Rushmore when Trump was rolling through a couple of years ago, and a lot of different things that are happening to have these massive and important historical contexts to them. And the thing about being a Native person, and I imagine also, being a Black person in America, is that knowing your history and understanding the context of your history isn't just something that's important that you do, but it's actually a tool of survival. So having an opinion about those things has to be informed by understanding the history of those things. The Black Hills were part of a treaty They were supposed to be able to retain the Black Hills because it's a sacred site to the Oglala people and to other people in the surrounding area. And that treaty was broken when General George Armstrong Custer came through and a bunch of other people found, and then everyone ran amok and started mining out on the Black Hills. And that ultimately went to the disregard of that land being important to the Oglala Lakota Nation, and then eventually somebody proposed carving these white so-called forefathers into the hillside of a sacred site. And that's messed up. Like, I got opinions about that.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, it's interesting because a lot of that really, like, obviously I'm not talking about this specifically in some of this work, but you definitely would find some of the tenets of those things, not just in Dead Pioneers, but also in my visual work.
How much do you credit sort of the 1950s TV shows and comic books? How much do you give credit to sort of became after that on the cultural feelings of Native Americans? Do you give any significance to that?
The only significance I would give to it is how much it has hijacked our own identity and our ability to define ourselves and have created the stereotypes that have led American people to not understand who we are as Native people. These things have been supplanted in the psyche of American culture, essentially since first contact, since, 1492, right? And these things have existed as sort of a means to an end to westward expansion, and then ultimately to consuming the romanticism that is America, the romantic nationalistic ideas of America, which has fed into entertainment and creating bad guys in old cowboy movies and things of that nature. And the problem with that is that it has taken away the nuance of the amount of different tribes that exist in America and how different each of those tribes are. There's, I think, 577 some different tribes that are federally recognized. There's like another couple hundred that are not federally recognized. And these tribal nations are as diverse as the world we live in. Like my people, the Paiutes are from Nevada, don't look like the Mohawks of upstate New York. They're all different people and different cultures, different languages, different everything. But 40% of Americans believe that Native American people don't exist anymore, that they are extinct. Why would they think that? That's a lot of people that think that Native people don't exist anymore. And it has to do with this process of creating a narrative that we only exist in the past, that we no longer exist anymore. And so doing something like Dead Pioneers ends up being important along with other bands that are doing similar things. 1876 is another band that we're really good friends with that are doing punk stuff as well. There's another band that I'm forgetting right now, but I'll get it in a moment. But all of these things point to the need for people to understand that not everything is as it seems, and that we are actually a living, breathing people with a living, breathing culture. We are Native people having an American experience. And music like this is one of many avenues that can express that experience and buck those stereotypes that have negatively affected us for generations.
Something a little bit more current. I want to know if you feel that it helps with awareness. The movie, Martin Scorsese, Killers of the Flower Moon. Did you see it? What was your opinions on it? And do you think that helps bring awareness to some of those things?
I've seen it. Yeah, yes and no. There's a lot of really good films out there done by Indigenous filmmakers telling Indigenous stories. This gets the sort of quarter in American, zeitgeist because Martin Scorsese is an incredible filmmaker.
Yeah,
he can get the budget that he needs to be able to do those things. But at the end of the day, he is ultimately a white man that's telling an Indigenous story. And that raises questions about the nuance of the story. And I know he worked really hard with the people and with the story and with relatives of the descendants who were currently being represented in that film. But, Kevin Costner did the same thing with Dances with Wolves, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's all sort of about intent, and I'm not a huge fan of intent. The film is well done. It's interesting. I think it had a whack ending for a number of reasons, but it does play an important point in a conversation piece. And, the lead female actress in it is up for, a number of different awards, and hopefully is up for an Oscar as well. Amazing to see. But I also have to wonder, if that's going to come through, and if she's part of that mainstream enough for something like that to matter. I think there's with it. I have a lot of different opinions. Savage Nobles is the other band I was thinking. Sorry.
Yeah, you knew it'd come back to you, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what's in store for 2024 for Dead Pioneers. Is there a tour in the works? More music? What can we expect with 2024 and you guys?
Man, I have no idea. I'll be honest. We were surprised. Well, I'll speak for myself. I was surprised that we got what we got. It has gotten to the level that it's gotten. We're running a second pressing on the record right now because there's just been so much demand. It was really stressful. We're doing everything independently, and so I had to raise the money to record. I had to raise the money to fly guys out. I had to, really sort of get the money that we needed to take care of everything. And it's been super stressful to be able to do that. And it's coming off. And this second pressing, I think we'll actually have a little bit of surplus cash that, I can pay these guys some money off of this. And that's great. And I'm really glad that we could do that. I want to make a second record. But I don't know how willing I am to do that without proper support. But there's things coming up. There's conversations happening. So we'll see what happens, and just sort of play it out right. We got a show coming up on the 17th. We're playing with Cheap Perfume, which is another up and coming Riot Girl band that's been sort of on that third tier opening for festivals, and they play with the Vandals, or not the Vandals, the Subhumans here recently, here in Denver, and they got this great song called "It's Okay to Punch Nazis." I mean, what's not to like? But I don't know. I'm just sort of playing it out and seeing what happens, and ready to make some decisions when we need to make some decisions. We're currently working on a couple of new songs, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it sounds like a true DIY kind of thing, spirit, right? Because even when we were trying to arrange the interview, I was like, can you direct me to your publicist so we can arrange something? You're like, dude, it's just me. So let's just schedule it right now, which, in a way I definitely appreciate it. But man, we're digging this record. We're really excited for your 2024. If you get out Midwest anywhere, we will host you and promote it as much as we can. Dead Pioneers, it's out now. So you say that there's more pressing. So we have physical copies of this. Is it vinyl? Is it CDs? Is it cassettes?
Yeah.
All that, huh?
We've got vinyl in a couple of record shops here in Denver. I've already paid for the second pressing to come through, so we're pressing another 500 or so records, and we're doing pre-orders on Bandcamp right now for anybody who wants to get in on that.
Is that where you can find most of the information on your Bandcamp?
Yeah, I also have a website. It's deadpioneers.band. And links to everything are also on that. Instagram is dead.pioneers. That's the only thing we're using on social media right now. I probably should set up on Facebook, but that's where we're at right now.
We appreciate your time today, man. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is great.
Not a very good Indian, maybe even a bad Indian. My cheekbones aren't high enough. I don't have enough beadwork or turquoise. I do my best to celebrate November like a month-long birthday for Indians. For those of you who don't know, which is probably most of you, it's a National Native American Heritage Month, and unfortunately celebrating feels like I'm celebrating my birthday by myself. No one seems to know that it's even happening, even with all the Facebook notices. I'm a bad Indian. My favorite movie genre is Westerns. My last name isn't a sentence.